February 1879. The Colorado wind didn't just blow. It screamed. Margaret Sullivan pressed herself against the wooden side of the mail coach, her fingers numb inside her thin gloves. The Philadelphia wool coat that had seemed so practical when she boarded the train 3 weeks ago now felt like paper against the fury of the mountain storm. Snow didn't fall here. It attacked, driving horizontally across the plains with a violence that stole her breath. The coach lurched to a stop so suddenly that Maggie pitched forward, catching herself against the seat. Through the frosted window, she could see nothing but white. Endless, murderous white. The door jerked open. Wind exploded into the cramped space, and with it came the driver's weathered face, ice already forming in his beard. "End of the line, miss." Maggie stared at him, certain she'd misheard over the howling storm. What? Can't go further. Horses are done, and I'm not dying for $2.17. His eyes flicked to her single trunk lashed to the top of the coach. Pinewood's 3 miles that way. He jerked his thumb into the wall of white. "Follow the road markers if you can see them. You can't leave me here." The words came out steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "I paid for passage to Pinewood." "You paid for passage as far as I could safely travel. This ain't safe." He was already climbing back up to the driver's seat. "There's a ranch house maybe a mile south. Big chimney. Look for smoke." "Wait." Maggie grabbed for the door, but he'd already slammed it shut. The coach lurched forward, turning in a wide arc. She watched through the window as it disappeared into the storm, the sound of hoofbeats swallowed by the wind within seconds. Silence then. Not peaceful silence, but the terrible quiet between one gust and the next. Maggie stood alone on what might have been a road, though the snow had already covered any trace of wagon ruts. Her trunk sat 10 feet away, a dark shape rapidly turning white. She had 17 cents in her reticule, the last of everything. The wind picked up again, and with it came clarity sharp as broken glass. She would die here, not might die, would die. In an hour, maybe less, the cold would steal the feeling from her feet, then her legs. She would sit down in the snow too tired to stand. She would close her eyes. They would find her in spring a gray-haired corpse, frozen in a drift. Maggie had survived too much to die like this. She forced her legs to move, stumbling toward her trunk. Her fingers, already stiffening, fumbled with the leather straps. Inside, wrapped in her mother's shawl, was the one good dress she owned. Beneath it, 3 underskirts. She pulled them on over the skirt she already wore, her teeth chattering so hard she bit her tongue. The taste of blood was warm, almost comforting. South. The driver had said south. She turned, trying to orient herself, but every direction looked the same. White above white, below white, in every direction. Then she saw it, a break in the storm just for a moment, a darker shadow against the gray-white sky. Could be a tree, could be a building, could be nothing. It was all she had. Maggie left the trunk. Inside were the few possessions she'd managed to keep after her parents died, her mother's cameo brooch, her father's watch. The daguerreotype of them on their wedding day, young and hopeful. She left them all and walked toward the shadow. Her feet disappeared with each step. The snow was past her ankles, now creeping toward her knees. Her skirts, heavy with ice, dragged at her legs. The wind found every gap in her clothing, every space between buttons, every inch of exposed skin at her wrists where her gloves didn't quite meet her sleeves. She couldn't feel her nose, couldn't feel her ears. Her lungs burned with each breath of air so cold it felt like swallowing knives. The shadow was gone, or had never been there. She was walking blind now, one foot in front of the other, because stopping meant dying. A sound cut through the wind, not natural, not the storm, a voice. "Over here, follow my voice." Maggie's head jerked up. Nothing but white. The voice came again, stronger this time, from her left. "Keep walking. I've got you." She turned, stumbling, her numb feet catching on her frozen skirts. Her knees hit the snow. She tried to rise, but her legs wouldn't obey. Then he was there, tall. That was her first impression. Tall and solid, a dark shape that blocked the wind. He knelt beside her and she saw his eyes. Blue. Impossibly blue against the white world visible above the scarf wrapped around the lower half of his face. "Can you stand?" she tried. Failed. He didn't wait for a second attempt. His arm went around her back under her knees, and he lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all. Through the multiple layers of her skirts and his heavy coat, she could feel the warmth of him. Her frozen hands clutched at his shoulder, desperate not to fall. "My trunk," she managed through chattering teeth. "On the road. I'll come back for it." His voice was deep calm, as if rescuing half-frozen women from blizzards was something he did every Tuesday. "Right now we need to get you warm before you lose your toes." He carried her through the storm. She had no sense of distance or direction, only the steady rhythm of his steps and the bulk of him between her and the killing wind. Minutes passed, or hours. Time had no meaning in the white. Then they were inside. The change was so sudden it hurt. Warmth hit her frozen skin like a physical blow. She gasped, and the sound turned into a cough that racked her whole body. He set her down on something soft, a chair. Her eyes, used to the snow's glare, struggled to adjust to the dimness. She made out a fireplace, flames dancing behind a metal screen, wooden walls, a table. A single room, small, but well built. "Don't get too close to the fire yet," his voice came from behind her. "Warm up gradual or you'll lose fingers." Maggie heard him moving, heard the clank of metal, a kettle, water being poured. Her body started to shake, violent tremors that she couldn't control. Her teeth clacked together so hard she feared they'd crack. He appeared in front of her with a thick blanket wool ruff against her frozen cheek as he wrapped it around her shoulders. Then he was kneeling, unlacing her boots with quick, efficient movements. "These are done," he said, setting aside the ice-encrusted leather. His hands moved to her stockings, and she jerked back. "I can manage." "You can't feel your hands well enough to grip fabric." It wasn't a question. He met her eyes, those startling blue eyes, and there was no impropriety in his gaze, only assessment. "I've got a sister. This isn't the first time I've tended frozen feet. You can keep your modesty and lose your toes, or you can let me help." She let him help. Her stockings were frozen to her skin. He peeled them away carefully, and she felt nothing. Looking down, she saw her feet were bone-white, bloodless. Terror spiked through her. "Will I lose them?" "No." He was already moving, bringing a basin of water. Not warm, not cold, just cool. He lowered her feet into it, and she gasped at even that mild temperature. "Feel that it hurts." "Good. Hurting means healing." He wrapped another blanket around her legs, covering her impropriety. "I'm going back for your trunk. Don't move from that chair and don't get closer to the fire. Understand?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. He stood rewrapping the scarf around his face. At the door he paused and looked back at her. "I've been waiting for you," he said. Then he was gone back into the storm. Maggie sat in the chair, feet in the basin of water, body wrapped in blankets that smelled of wood smoke and something else, something indefinably masculine. Her mind, sluggish from cold, tried to make sense of his last words. Waiting for her. How could he have been waiting for her? She was a stranger, a mail-order bride who'd been abandoned by her intended before they'd even met. The shaking began to subside. Feeling crept back into her extremities, and with it came pain. Her toes felt like they were being stabbed with hot needles. Her fingers throbbed. Even her nose and ears burned as blood returned to the frozen tissue. She was alive. Against all odds, impossibly, she was alive. The door opened again, bringing a swirl of snow and wind. He entered, carrying her trunk on one shoulder, shaking off the accumulation of ice before setting it down against the wall. "Storm's getting worse," he said, unwinding the scarf. "We'll be here till morning at least." With the scarf removed, she could see his face properly for the first time. Weathered. Probably in his 40s, though the lines around his eyes could have been from squinting against sun and wind rather than age. Strong jaw, straight nose that had been broken at least once, and hair she noticed now that he'd removed his hat that was completely silver, not gray, not graying, pure silver like polished metal in the firelight. He saw her looking, and a wry smile touched his mouth. Surprises most people first time they see it. "How old are you?" 45. He moved to the fireplace, adding wood with practiced ease. "Been this color since I was 28. Mining accident, cave-in. They got me out after 3 days, and when I looked in a mirror, every hair on my head had gone white." He glanced back at her. "Doctor said it was shock. Whatever it was, it never changed back." Maggie's hand went involuntarily to her own hair, still hidden beneath her bonnet. "You can take that off," he said. "Dry your hair by the fire." Her hands, still clumsy with cold, fumbled with the ties. The bonnet came away, and with it, the careful arrangement of pins she'd used to try to make her hair look darker. It fell around her shoulders, and in the firelight it gleamed. Silver. Not as pure as his, but close. At 36, she had perhaps a dozen dark strands left among the gray. He looked at her hair for a long moment. Then he nodded as if confirming something to himself. "That's why Benjamin refused you." The name hit her like a slap. She straightened in the chair. "You know Benjamin Hartwell?" "Hard not to, in a town the size of Pinewood. He owns the general store, runs most of the commerce for 3 counties. He poured tea from the kettle into 2 tin cups. "Sent word 2 weeks ago that he'd ordered himself a bride from Philadelphia. Told anyone who'd listen that he was bringing refinement and culture to the frontier. He told me in his letters that appearance didn't matter, that he wanted a partner, someone of mature years and practical skills." The bitterness in her voice surprised her. "I was honest about my hair. I described it in my very first letter. People hear what they want to hear." He handed her a cup. The tea was strong and sweet, warming her from the inside. He was expecting gray, maybe a strand or two at the temples, something distinguished. Not this. "Not hair the color of an old woman's. Not hair the color of yours," he corrected. "There's a difference." She waited, but he didn't elaborate. Instead, he pulled a second chair close to the fire and sat cradling his own cup. "I'm Nathaniel Sterling," he said. "Most people call me Nate. I own Silver Ridge Ranch about 2 miles from here. This is the line cabin on the eastern border of my property." Margaret Sullivan. She took another sip of tea, feeling strength returning to her limbs. "Though I suppose I should still use my maiden name since there won't be a wedding after all." "He refused you then, in person?" It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "At his store, in front of half the town." The memory was still sharp. "He looked at me, looked at my hair, and said I'd misrepresented myself, that he'd expected a woman, not a grandmother. He offered to pay for my return passage to Philadelphia if I'd leave on the next eastbound coach. And you said, 'I told him he could keep his money and his pity.'" She met Nate's eyes. "I have 17 cents to my name, no home to return to, and no prospects. But I'd rather starve in the street than accept another penny from Benjamin Hartwell." Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. What happened to bring you here with 17 cents and a trunk? So she told him. About her father's death 2 years ago, the consumption that had wasted him slowly over 6 months. About the debts they'd discovered after debts her mother had hidden, to spare him worry, $340 owed to various merchants and creditors. About selling the house to pay those debts, her mother moving into a boarding house and taking in sewing to survive. About the fever that had taken her mother 8 months later, leaving Maggie truly alone. "I'm a seamstress," she said. "A good one. I worked at Mitchell's fine dressmaking in Philadelphia for 3 years, building a modest savings, but it wasn't enough for my own shop, and it wasn't enough to live on indefinitely. When I saw Benjamin's advertisement in the newspaper, it seemed like Providence. A chance to start over, to build something new. And instead you nearly froze to death in a blizzard." "Yes." She managed a small smile. "Though I suppose I should thank you for preventing that outcome." "You saved my life, Mr. Sterling." "Nate," he corrected, "and I did what anyone would do. You said you were waiting for me. How did you know I'd be on that coach?" He set down his cup and stood moving to the window. Through the frost-covered glass, nothing was visible but white. "Benjamin sent word through town that his bride was arriving today. The whole place has been buzzing about it for a week." He turned back to her. "I had business at the eastern fence line this morning. When the storm came up, I headed for this cabin, but I kept thinking about that mail coach, about it trying to make it through in this weather. Old Dan driving that route, he's cautious. Figured he'd turn back rather than risk it. He did turn back, after he left me to die." Nate's jaw tightened. Dan's not a bad man, just practical to a fault. In his mind, better 1 person at risk than 6. Very practical. The anger that she'd been too cold and too frightened to feel earlier began to kindle, now warm and righteous. "I paid for passage to Pinewood. And you'll get there soon as this storm breaks." He returned to his chair. "But that won't be tonight. Might not even be tomorrow, depending on how long this blows." The implications of his words settled over her. She was alone in a cabin with a man she'd met less than an hour ago. No chaperone, no propriety. If word got back to Pinewood, her already tattered reputation would be destroyed completely. As if reading her thoughts, Nate said, "I'll sleep on the floor. You can have the bed." He gestured to a narrow cot in the corner that she hadn't noticed before. "It's not much, but it's clean, and you'll be warm." "I can't take your bed." "You can, and you will. You just survived exposure. Your body needs rest to recover." His tone left no room for argument. Besides, I've slept on worse than a cabin floor." Maggie wanted to protest further, but exhaustion was creeping over her like a heavy blanket. The warmth, the tea, the simple fact that she was alive when she should have been dead. It was all too much. "Thank you," she said quietly. Nate nodded. "Get some rest. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." 1. A survival and backstory. 8 to 20 minutes. Morning came late, the light gray and diffused through windows still half covered with snow. Maggie woke to the smell of coffee and salt pork frying. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then memory returned in a rush. The blizzard, the rescue, Nate Sterling's impossibly blue eyes. She sat up, every muscle in her body protesting. Her feet throbbed, but when she examined them, the skin was pink and healthy. No blackening, no signs of frostbite. Relief washed through her. "Coffee's ready," Nate called from the main room. Maggie quickly braided her silver hair and pinned it up, wishing for a mirror. Her dress was wrinkled from sleeping in it, but it would have to do. She emerged from the sleeping area to find Nate at the stove dishing up eggs and pork onto 2 tin plates. "Storm broke about an hour before dawn," he said, handing her a plate. "We can head to town after breakfast." They ate in comfortable silence. The food was simple, but well prepared. When she complimented him on it, he shrugged. "Man living alone learns to cook or starves. I prefer not to starve." "You live alone?" The question came out before she could stop it. "With my niece Rose. She's 17. Her parents died of fever when she was 12, and she's been with me since." He refilled her coffee cup. "My wife passed 5 years ago, so it's just the two of us at the main house." There was a story there she could tell. Pain in the way he said wife and the careful blankness of his expression. But it wasn't her place to pry. They cleaned up together, working with an ease that surprised her. He seemed comfortable with domestic tasks, not fumbling or resentful like so many men she'd known. When everything was packed and secured, he helped her into her coat, still damp from yesterday's ordeal, but better than nothing. Outside, the world had been transformed. Snow stretched in every direction, pristine and blinding in the morning sun. 2 horses stood in a rough shelter beside the cabin already saddled. "You ride?" Nate asked. "Not well, but I can stay on." "Good enough." He helped her mount, his hand steady at her waist. Her trunk was lashed to his own horse. "Stay close and follow my lead. The road's buried, but I know the way by landmarks." They rode in single file, Nate's horse breaking trail through snow that reached its chest in places. Maggie clung to her saddle, trusting the animal to follow. The journey, that should have taken an hour, stretched to 3. Pinewood appeared gradually. First a smudge of smoke on the horizon, then the outline of buildings, finally the clear shapes of a main street lined with false-fronted shops. It was larger than she'd expected, probably 300 souls or more. A proper frontier town, not just a cluster of shacks. People emerged from buildings as they rode past, staring, whispering behind mittened hands. A woman in a fur-trimmed coat actually gasped and turned away as if the sight of Maggie was offensive. "Pay them no mind," Nate said over his shoulder. "Small-town gossip is like snow, makes a lot of noise falling, but it melts eventually." He led her to a 2-story building with a painted sign reading Wilson's Boarding House. A plump woman with iron-gray hair answered his knock. "Nate Sterling?" She looked past him to Maggie. "And this must be Benjamin's Philadelphia bride. Heard about the excitement yesterday. Mrs. Wilson, this is Margaret Sullivan. She needs a room. Does she now?" Mrs. Wilson's sharp eyes took in every detail. Maggie's wrinkled dress, her hastily braided hair, the fact that she'd arrived on horseback with Nate Sterling after spending the night who knows where. Benjamin know about this. Benjamin refused Miss Sullivan. She's in need of respectable lodging while she determines her next steps. Something in Nate's tone made Mrs. Wilson straighten. I see. Well then, Miss Sullivan, welcome to Wilson's boarding house. I've got a room available, second floor, faces east. $3 a week, meals included. $3. Maggie did the calculation in her head. She had 17 cents. Her trunk contained possessions she could sell perhaps, but nothing that would bring $3. I'm afraid I can't pay immediately, she began. First week's free, Mrs. Wilson interrupted. You've had a rough go of it, sounds like. After that, we'll work something out. I always need help with mending and such. Gratitude swelled in Maggie's throat. Thank you. I'm an excellent seamstress. I can more than earn my keep. I'm sure you can. Mrs. Wilson stepped aside. Come in out of the cold, both of you. I'll have some tea sent up. Nate carried Maggie's trunk upstairs to a small but clean room. A narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand with a chipped pitcher. Luxury after what she'd been through. I should go, Nate said from the doorway. Rose will be wondering where I am, but if you need anything, send word to Silver Ridge Ranch. Anyone can give you directions. Mr. Sterling, Nate. She turned to face him fully. I don't know how to thank you properly. You saved my life, and you've shown me more kindness than I had any right to expect. You had every right to expect basic human decency, Miss Sullivan. His blue eyes were steady on hers. What Benjamin did was shameful, but not everyone in Pinewood shares his values. After he left, Maggie unpacked her trunk with shaking hands. The reality of her situation was settling over her like a cold fog. She was stranded in a frontier town where she knew no one. Her intended husband had rejected her publicly. She had no money, no prospects, and winter had barely begun. But she was alive. And as she pulled out her mother's sewing kit, fingers tracing the familiar tools of her trade, she felt a spark of determination kindle in her chest. She had survived Philadelphia society's scorn. She had survived her parents' deaths and the poverty that followed. She had survived a blizzard that should have killed her. She would survive this too. Act 1. B. First connection 20 to 35 minutes. 3 days passed. Maggie remained in her room at the boarding house, venturing out only for meals. Mrs. Wilson proved to be a woman of her word, presenting Maggie with a basket of mending on the second day. Just some torn sheets and a dress that needs letting out, she said. Take your time. The work was simple, mindless. It gave Maggie's hands something to do while her mind wrestled with her future. Return to Philadelphia. With what money? Stay in Pinewood. Doing what? On the fourth day, a knock came at her door. She opened it to find a young woman, perhaps 17, with honey-colored hair and warm brown eyes. Miss Sullivan, I'm Rose Sterling, Uncle Nate's niece. Oh. Maggie stepped back. Please come in. Rose entered with the confidence of youth settling on the edge of the bed without invitation. Uncle Nate told me what happened, how Benjamin Hartwell is a spineless toad who doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as you. Despite everything, Maggie smiled. He said that, not in those exact words, but the meaning was clear. Rose pulled a package from her bag. I'm here to commission your services. The harvest dance is in 2 weeks and I need a dress. Everyone says you're the finest seamstress in 3 states. I don't know about 3 states. Uncle Nate showed me the handkerchief he found in your trunk. The embroidery was exquisite. Rose opened the package, revealing a length of deep blue fabric. Can you make something beautiful from this? Maggie took the fabric, examining it with a professional eye. Good quality wool, perfect for a dance dress. Her mind was already designing, seeing possibilities in the drape and weight. Yes, she said, I can make something beautiful. Over the next hour, she took Rose's measurements and discussed the design. The girl was easy to work with, enthusiastic without being demanding. As they talked, Maggie learned more about Silver Ridge Ranch, about Rose's parents who'd died of fever, about the life Nate had built from nothing. He had a mining claim that paid out just enough to buy the land, Rose explained. That was 15 years ago. Now we run 200 head of cattle and breed horses. Uncle Nate does most of the blacksmithing for the region, too. There's not much that man can't build or fix with his own 2 hands. He seems very capable. He is. Rose met her eyes. He's also the loneliest man I know. Since Aunt Elena died, he just works. From dawn till past dark every day. It's like he's trying to exhaust himself so he doesn't have to think. Maggie recognized the impulse. She'd done the same after her mother's death. "I'll have your dress ready in 10 days, she said, changing the subject. "Come back then for a final fitting." After Rose left, Maggie spread the blue fabric on her bed and began cutting patterns from newspaper. The familiar work soothed her, the scissors moving with practiced precision. She'd spent 3 years making dresses for Philadelphia society, women creating beauty for others, while her own life crumbled. Maybe here, in this rough frontier town, she could build something for herself. A week later, Rose returned for her fitting. The dress was nearly complete, just requiring final adjustments. As Maggie pinned the hem, Rose chatted about the upcoming dance, about which boys might ask her to waltz, about the gossip swirling through town. "Mrs. Beatrice Henderson is telling everyone you're a fallen woman," Rose said, matter-of-factly. "Says no respectable lady would spend the night alone with a man in a cabin." Maggie's hands stilled. "I see. I told her Uncle Nate was a perfect gentleman and that she should mind her own business before someone minded it for her." Rose grinned at the memory. "She hasn't spoken to me since." "You shouldn't make enemies on my account. Mrs. Henderson was already my enemy. She's been trying to catch Uncle Nate for herself ever since Aunt Elena died. A 20-year-old widow chasing a 45-year-old rancher. It's pathetic." 20 years old, so young and already widowed. Maggie thought of her own broken engagement, her years of loneliness. At least she'd never known the grief of losing a husband. "There," she said, setting aside the pins. "Try walking in it." Rose moved across the room, the skirt swirling around her ankles. The bodice fit perfectly, emphasizing her slim waist without being immodest. The blue brought out her eyes, made her skin glow. "It's perfect," Rose breathed. "Miss Sullivan, you're an artist. I'm a seamstress, but thank you." "No, truly, this is the most beautiful dress I've ever owned." Rose twirled again, watching the fabric move. "What do I owe you?" Maggie named a fair price and Rose paid in cash without hesitation. Real money, the first Maggie had earned since arriving in Pinewood. "Uncle Nate said to give you this too." Rose handed her a folded paper. "He's been working on it all week." Maggie unfolded the paper to find a detailed sketch. A shawl, she realized, decorated with an intricate embroidered pattern of columbine flowers and bluebells. Mountain flowers, Colorado flowers. At the bottom, in bold handwriting, "Commission for a gift. Payment upon completion, sterling." "He wants you to make this," Rose explained, "for my birthday next month, but he didn't want to ask in person in case you refused." Maggie studied the sketch. The design was more complex than anything she'd attempted recently, requiring hours of meticulous work. But it was beautiful, the kind of challenge she'd craved during her years at Mitchell's. "Tell him I accept the commission." Rose's smile could have lit the room. "I knew you would. Uncle Nate has good instincts about people." After Rose left, Maggie sat with the sketch for a long time. Nate Sterling had been nothing but kind to her. He'd saved her life, secured her lodging, and now he was offering her real work. Work that paid. More than that, he'd offered her dignity. Not pity, not charity, but fair employment based on her skills. She began work on the shawl that afternoon, losing herself in the rhythm of needle and thread. The boarding house room was too small for her to spread out properly, so she worked at the tiny desk, hunched over the fabric until her back ached. 3 days into the project, another knock came at her door. She opened it, expecting Mrs. Wilson with more mending. Instead, Benjamin Hartwell stood in the hallway. He looked much as he had when she'd first seen him at the train station. Average height, thinning brown hair, weak chin hidden behind a carefully groomed beard, well-dressed in the fashion of a man who wanted to appear more successful than he actually was. "Miss Sullivan," he removed his hat, "might I have a word?" Everything in Maggie wanted to slam the door in his face, but curiosity and perhaps a desire for closure made her step back. "You have 5 minutes." He entered, looking around the small room with barely concealed disdain. "I've heard you're taking in sewing work, that you've established yourself as a seamstress. News travels quickly in small towns." "Indeed." He cleared his throat. "I wanted to apologize for the manner of our parting. I was harsh, unkind. You deserved better." "Yes, I did." Her blunt agreement seemed to throw him. He'd expected tears, perhaps, gratitude for his condescension, not this cool assessment. "I've reconsidered my position," he said. If you're willing to overlook my initial reaction, we could still proceed with the marriage. On certain conditions, of course. Conditions. You would need to dye your hair. There are tonics available that can restore color or at least darken gray to something more acceptable. And you would present yourself as my wife in public, but we would maintain separate bedrooms, a marriage of convenience for respectability. Maggie stared at him. The sheer audacity of it took her breath away. "Let me understand you correctly," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "You publicly humiliated me, refused me at your store in front of witnesses, and now you want me to alter my appearance to suit your vanity and enter a loveless marriage where I would be little more than a housekeeper with a ring. When you put it that way, it sounds rather cold. Because it is cold. Colder than the blizzard that nearly killed me." She walked to the door and opened it. "Your 5 minutes are up, Mr. Hartwell, and so is this conversation. Forever." His face reddened. "You're making a mistake. You think Nate Sterling's interest in you is romantic. He's commissioning work out of pity. In a month, maybe 2, he'll lose interest, and you'll be right back where you started, alone, poor, desperate. If that happens, I'll face it with my dignity intact, which is more than you can say." She gestured to the hallway. "Goodbye, Mr. Hartwell." He left without another word, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Maggie closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. The nerve of that man, the absolute gall. But beneath the anger, a seed of doubt took root. Was Nate commissioning work out of pity, the shawl the referral of his niece, the rescue from the blizzard? Were these the actions of a kind man or a pitying one? She returned to her sewing with fierce determination. She would complete this shawl. She would make it the finest piece of embroidery she'd ever created. And she would prove to Nate Sterling and to herself that she was worth something beyond pity. The columbine flowers took shape under her needle, each petal requiring dozens of tiny stitches. Blue thread for the petals, gold for the centers, green for the stems and leaves. The bluebells were even more delicate clusters of tiny bell-shaped blooms that seemed to ripple across the fabric. She worked late into the nights by candlelight until her eyes burned and her fingers cramped. 10 days after Rose's first visit, the shawl was complete. It was beautiful. Even Maggie, her own harshest critic, could see that. The flowers seemed alive, 3-dimensional, against the soft cream cashmere. The border was a masterpiece of symmetry and detail. She wrapped it carefully in tissue paper and sent word to the ranch that the commission was complete. Nate arrived the next afternoon. Mrs. Wilson showed him up to Maggie's room, her expression knowing. The older woman had become something of an ally over the past 2 weeks, defending Maggie against the worst of the town gossip. "Miss Sullivan." Nate removed his hat as he entered. His silver hair was wind-blown, his face weathered from outdoor work. He looked solid, real, in a way Benjamin Hartwell never had. "Mr. Sterling, the shawl is finished." She handed him the wrapped package. He opened it slowly, and she watched his face as the shawl was revealed. His expression didn't change much. A slight widening of the eyes, a softening around the mouth, but when he looked up at her, something burned in those blue eyes. "This is beyond anything I imagined," he said quietly. "Rose will treasure it." "I hope so. It was a pleasure to create." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch, setting it on her desk. The agreed payment plus extra for the exceptional quality. Maggie opened the pouch. Inside were gold coins, more than they'd discussed, far more. "This is too much. It's what the work is worth." He rewrapped the shawl with careful hands. "I have another commission if you're willing. The ranch employs 22 hands year-round. They need new work shirts, most of them. Durable fabric, practical design. And I need a winter coat. My old one is more patch than original material." Work. Real sustained work. Enough to keep her through the winter and beyond. "I'm willing," she said. "But I'll need better workspace than this room. Somewhere I can spread out patterns, organize fabric. I have a cabin on the ranch, empty since my wife passed. It has a large workroom with good light. You'd be welcome to use it." The offer hung between them. A cabin, on his property. The gossip would be vicious. "People will talk," Maggie said. "People are already talking." Nate met her eyes. "Question is, do you care more about what they say or about building something real?" She thought of Benjamin's offer. Dye your hair, hide yourself, be respectable. She thought of her mother, who'd worked herself to death rather than accept charity. She thought of the girl she'd been in Philadelphia, always trying to make herself smaller, quieter, more acceptable. "When can I see this cabin?" she asked. Nate's smile was slow but genuine. "How about now?" And so Maggie Sullivan, the rejected mail-order bride with silver hair and 17 cents to her name, left the boarding house with Nate Sterling, rode out to Silver Ridge Ranch under a sky so blue it hurt to look at, and saw for the first time the place that would become her home. The cabin sat in a clearing ringed by pine trees, smoke curling from its chimney. Larger than the line cabin where she'd nearly died, but still modest. A main room with a stone fireplace. A bedroom, and a third room flooded with light from windows on 3 sides. "Elena's workroom," Nate said from the doorway. "She made quilts, clothes for the ranch children, curtains for half the houses in Pinewood." The room held a large table shelves for supplies, a dress form in the corner, everything a seamstress could need. "It's perfect," Maggie breathed. "It's yours, for as long as you need it." Nate turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. I know Benjamin came to see you. Mrs. Wilson mentioned it. He made me an offer. And you refused him." "I did?" Nate nodded. "Good, because that man doesn't deserve you, Miss Sullivan, and I think you're starting to realize you deserve better than him." After he left, Maggie stood in Elena Sterling's workroom and let herself imagine. Imagine creating beautiful things in this space. Imagine building a business, a reputation, a life. Imagine staying. The seed that Benjamin had tried to plant, the doubt about Nate's motives, withered and died. Whatever Nate Sterling's reasons for helping her pity wasn't among them. He saw something in her, something she was only beginning to see in herself. Worth. The cabin became Maggie's sanctuary. She moved her belongings from the boarding house 1 week after Nate showed her the workroom paying Mrs. Wilson for her kindness with a hand-stitched quilt that made the older woman's eyes grow suspiciously bright. "You're a good girl, Margaret Sullivan," Mrs. Wilson said, folding the quilt with reverent hands. "Don't let this town's small minds make you forget that." The first morning in the cabin, Maggie woke to silence so complete it was almost frightening. No creaking floorboards from other boarders, no street noise, no voices drifting through thin walls. Just the whisper of wind through pine trees and the distant sound of cattle lowing. She made coffee on the small stove, watching dawn paint the mountains gold and purple. The isolation should have worried her. Instead, it felt like freedom. By the time Nate arrived with fabric for the work shirts, she'd already organized the workroom to her specifications. Patterns hung on one wall, thread organized by color on the shelves, the table cleared and ready for cutting. "You work fast," he observed, setting down bolts of heavy canvas. "I work efficiently. There's a difference." She examined the fabric with a professional eye. "This will hold up to hard use. Good choice." "I'll leave you to it then." He turned to go, then hesitated. "Rose wanted me to ask if you'd join us for Sunday dinner. Nothing formal. Just family." Family. The word settled over her like a warm blanket. She'd been without family for so long. I'd like that. Sunday was 5 days away. Maggie threw herself into work, measuring and cutting and stitching until her fingers ached. The shirts took shape quickly, each one identical to the last. Practical garments built to withstand the punishing work of ranching. On the third day, Nate brought supplies. Not just fabric, but food. Coffee flour, sugar, salt, pork. "You can't work on an empty stomach," he said, unpacking the goods in her small kitchen. "I can pay for these now." She gestured to the coins from the shawl commission, carefully hoarded. "You don't need to provide for me. Consider it part of your wages, room and board included." He met her eyes, and something unspoken passed between them. "I take care of my people, Maggie. You work for me now. That makes you mine to look after." The possessiveness in his words should have rankled. Instead, it sent warmth curling through her chest. After he left, she examined the supplies more carefully. Not just staples, but luxuries. Real butter, fresh eggs, a small pot of honey. He was feeding her the way he'd feed family, not an employee. The distinction mattered. That afternoon, as she worked on the 10th shirt, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Through the window, she saw not Nate, but a stranger. A man in his 50s, well-dressed, riding a fine horse. He dismounted and approached the cabin with the confidence of someone accustomed to having doors opened for him. Maggie met him on the porch, scissors still in hand. "Can I help you? Are you the seamstress?" He looked her up and down, lingering on her silver hair with barely concealed distaste. "Miss Sullivan, is it?" "I am." "Harold Prescott. I own the lumber mill south of town." He didn't offer his hand. "I've heard you're taking commissions. My daughter needs a wedding dress. I'm prepared to pay handsomely for quick work." Something in his tone put her on guard. Not the words themselves, but the assumption beneath them, that she would be grateful for his business, that his money entitled him to her immediate compliance. "When is the wedding?" 3 weeks. He named a figure that made her eyes widen despite herself. "Half now, half on delivery, assuming the work is satisfactory." 3 weeks. A wedding dress required at least 6 weeks of proper work. Intricate beading, delicate lace, countless fittings. 3 weeks was impossible unless she worked day and night and sacrificed quality. "I'm afraid I can't accept the commission," Maggie said. 3 weeks isn't enough time to create a dress worthy of a bride." Prescott's expression darkened. "I'm offering you more money than you'll see in 6 months of shirt making. Money doesn't change the laws of time and craftsmanship. You're refusing me." He stepped closer, crowding her against the porch railing. "You should know, Miss Sullivan, that people who refuse Harold Prescott tend to regret it. I have considerable influence in this town. And I have considerable experience dealing with men who think intimidation is the same as negotiation." She didn't back down, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "The answer is no. Good day, Mr. Prescott." For a moment she thought he might grab her. His hand actually lifted, fingers curling. Then hoofbeats sounded again, and Nate appeared around the bend, riding fast. He took in the scene at a glance. Prescott too close. Maggie pressed against the railing. His face went hard as stone. "Problem here, Harold." Prescott stepped back smoothly, as if he'd never been threatening at all. "Just discussing business with Miss Sullivan. She's quite stubborn about her artistic vision. Miss Sullivan is particular about quality. It's why I hired her." Nate dismounted but didn't approach the porch. His hand, Maggie noticed, rested casually on the rifle secured to his saddle. "Was there anything else?" "No, I believe we're finished here." Prescott mounted his horse with practiced ease. Before riding off, he looked at Maggie one more time. "You should be more careful about whose offers you refuse, Miss Sullivan. Winter's coming. A woman alone can face all sorts of hardships." After he left, Nate finally climbed the porch steps. What did he really want? A wedding dress in 3 weeks. When I refused, he tried to intimidate me into accepting. Harold Prescott doesn't take no well. Never has. Nate's jaw was tight. "You did right refusing him, but he's vindictive. Watch yourself around him." "Is he really that influential?" "He thinks he is. Owns the mill, has money in the bank, sits on the town council." Nate met her eyes. "But influence doesn't mean power, not real power. That comes from respect, and Harold Prescott has damn little of that." Over the next week, Maggie completed the work shirts and began Nate's winter coat. He came by daily, ostensibly to check on progress, but really, she suspected, to ensure Harold Prescott didn't return. She didn't mind. His presence had become comfortable, familiar. He'd bring small gifts. A basket of apples from a tree on the ranch, fresh trout from the stream, once a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. "I'm not much for reading myself," he admitted, handing her the slim volume, but Elena loved poetry. This was one of her favorites. Maggie opened it carefully. The pages were worn soft, certain poems marked with pressed flowers. She could almost see Elena Sterling, young and vital, reading by lamplight. "Thank you for sharing this with me. Elena would have liked you." Nate's voice was quiet. "You have the same steel in your spine, the same refusal to be diminished." That night, Maggie read the marked poems by candlelight. Love sonnets mostly, passionate declarations of devotion. She wondered if Nate had given Elena the book, if he'd read these words to her. The next day, Rose arrived for her regular visit. The girl had taken to stopping by twice a week, ostensibly to check on her dance dress, but really to talk. She was starved for female companionship, Maggie realized. The ranch was isolated, and most girls Rose's age in town were already married or engaged. "Mrs. Henderson is spreading rumors about you," Rose announced, settling into the chair by the workroom window. Says you're living in sin with Uncle Nate, that he's keeping you as his mistress." Maggie's needle stilled. "I see. It's nonsense, of course. Uncle Nate sleeps at the main house, and you're here alone. But people like Mrs. Henderson don't care about facts." Rose picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. "I told her she was a bitter old crow who couldn't stand seeing Uncle Nate happy." "Rose, you can't say things like that." "Why not? It's true." The girl's eyes flashed. "She's been chasing him for years, showing up at the ranch with pies, batting her eyelashes, wearing dresses cut too low for a woman her age. It's pathetic. And now that he's actually interested in someone, she's trying to ruin it." "He's not interested in me, not like that." Rose laughed. "Miss Sullivan, I've lived with my uncle for 5 years. I've seen him with the widows and spinsters who throw themselves at him. He's polite but distant. With you, he's different, present, alive." Before Maggie could respond, the door burst open. Nate stood in the frame, his face pale beneath its weathering. "Rose, go back to the house, now." The girl jumped to her feet. "What's wrong?" "Just go." His voice brooked no argument. After Rose left, Nate closed the door and leaned against it. "I need your help. It's the books for the ranch, the ledgers." "I don't understand." "I've been going through the accounts, trying to figure out why we're short on cash when we should be flush from the cattle sale last month." He pulled a leather-bound ledger from his coat. "The numbers don't add up. I'm good with my hands, good with animals and metal. But bookkeeping was always Elena's domain, and since she passed, I've been managing on instinct more than accuracy." Maggie took the ledger, opening it to the most recent entries. The handwriting was bold but inconsistent, numbers crammed together, calculations done in the margins. "May I see the invoices, the receipts from sales?" He brought her everything. Bills of sale receipts, invoices from suppliers. She spread them across the workroom table, organizing by date and category. Her mother had taught her bookkeeping, insisted she understand the business side of their dressmaking shop. Those skills, dormant for years, came flooding back. An hour later, she'd found the discrepancy. "You're missing money," she said. $270 to be exact. "According to your ledger, you paid these invoices." She laid out 5 receipts. "All from Benjamin Hartwell's store. But look at the dates." Nate leaned over her shoulder, close enough that she could smell wood smoke and leather. "What about them? These invoices are dated after you supposedly paid them, which means either you paid before receiving the goods, which makes no business sense, or someone altered the dates." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Benjamin. It's a common scheme. Create invoices for goods never delivered or inflate prices on goods that were delivered. The rancher assumes he paid and forgets about it. The merchant pockets the difference." $270. Nate's voice was dangerously quiet. "That explains why the account's been so tight. I thought we'd had a bad year." "You had a fine year. You've just been systematically robbed." He straightened, and Maggie saw something shift in his expression. Not just anger at the theft, but something else. Respect. Admiration. "How did you learn to do this, track numbers like a bloodhound?" "My mother ran a dressmaking shop. She taught me that beauty is worthless if the business fails, that art and commerce aren't opposites, they're partners." Maggie closed the ledger. "I can organize your books properly. Create a system that prevents this from happening again. It would take a few days of concentrated work, but it's not difficult once you understand the principles." "I'd pay you for that work. You're already paying me for the sewing. This is different. This is saving the ranch." His hand covered hers on the ledger, warm and calloused. "Maggie, you just found money I thought was gone. That's worth more than any number of shirts." The touch lingered a moment longer than necessary. When he pulled away, Maggie felt the loss of warmth, like a physical ache. That evening, she rode into town with Nate, not to confront Benjamin directly, but to visit the bank. The manager, a careful man named Patterson, reviewed the evidence with narrowed eyes. "This is serious," he said. "If Hartwell's been doing this to Sterling, he's likely doing it to others." "Can you check your records?" Maggie asked. "See if other ranchers have similar discrepancies." Patterson did. Within an hour, they'd found 3 more victims. Small amounts, never enough to raise immediate alarm, but adding up to nearly $1,000 over 2 years. "I'll need to contact the others," Patterson said. "Build a proper case, but Miss Sullivan, your analysis here is impeccable. Have you considered offering bookkeeping services professionally?" The idea hadn't occurred to her, But looking at the neat columns of figures, the clear proof of her competence, Maggie felt a door opening. "I might," she said. On the ride back to the ranch, Nate was quiet. Not uncomfortable silence, but contemplative. When they reached the cabin, he helped her down from the horse, his hand steady at her waist. "You didn't have to help with this," he said. "The books, the investigation. That wasn't part of our agreement." "No, but it was the right thing to do." Elena used to say that. The right thing isn't always the easy thing, but it's the only thing worth doing. He hadn't released her waist. They stood close in the gathering darkness, his face half-shadowed. "I'm starting to see why the universe sent you here, Maggie Sullivan." "I thought Benjamin Hartwell sent me here." "No, Benjamin Hartwell just drove the coach. The universe had other plans." His thumb traced a small circle on her waist, the touch burning through the fabric of her dress. "Better plans." He left before she could respond, riding back toward the main house. Maggie stood in the cold, watching him disappear into the darkness, her heart beating a rhythm that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with hope. Act 2, B, Partnership Formation. 50 to 65 minutes. News of Benjamin Hartwell's fraud spread through Pinewood like wildfire. Within a week, 4 ranchers had filed formal complaints. The bank froze Benjamin's accounts. The town council called an emergency meeting. Maggie stayed out of town, focusing on her work. But work was increasingly difficult when her mind kept drifting to Nate Sterling, the way he looked at her, the casual touches that didn't feel casual at all, the gifts that appeared on her porch. A new pair of scissors, sharp enough to cut silk. A bolt of fine wool perfect for a winter dress. A rocking chair because he'd noticed her sitting on the hard workroom chair and thought she deserved better. Rose noticed too. "He's courting you," she said matter-of-factly during one of her visits. "In his way. Uncle Nate doesn't do flowers and poetry. He does practical things, useful things, things that say, 'I see you, I know what you need, I want to provide it.' We're business associates." "Business associates don't look at each other the way you two do," Rose grinned. "It's adorable, actually. 2 middle-aged people dancing around each other like nervous teenagers." "I'm 36, not middle-aged." "And he's 45, both old enough to know what you want. So why not just admit it?" Why not indeed? Maggie had spent so many years hiding her gray hair under bonnets and dyes, hiding her intelligence so men wouldn't feel threatened, hiding her desires because proper women didn't want, didn't need, didn't demand. But here in this cabin on the edge of nowhere, hiding felt like a waste. The Sunday dinner invitation became a weekly ritual. Maggie would ride to the main house, a sturdy 2-story building that had clearly been added to over the years. Rose would greet her at the door, chattering about the week's events. And Nate would emerge from his forge, still covered in soot, to wash up before the meal. He was teaching her blacksmithing, not formally but in small increments, showing her how to heat metal to the right temperature by color, how to shape iron with precise hammer strikes, how to quench and temper and transform raw material into something useful. "You have good hands for this," he said during their 3rd lesson. His own hands covered hers on the hammer guiding the strike. Steady, patient. Most people try to force the metal. You let it tell you what it wants to be. The heat from the forge was nothing compared to the heat of him behind her, his chest pressed against her back, his breath warm on her neck. "What does this piece want to be?" she asked, her voice barely steady. "A hinge for Rose's hope chest, something that will last generations." He guided another strike and the metal began to curve. "There, see how it bends when you work with it instead of against it," she saw. And she wondered if he was talking about more than metal. That night the 3 of them sat around the dining table like a real family. Rose served pot roast with potatoes and carrots, a recipe her mother had taught her. Nate carved the meat with the same precision he brought to his forge work. Maggie found herself relaxing into the domesticity of it, the simple pleasure of shared food and easy conversation. After dinner, Rose excused herself to work on her studies. That left Maggie and Nate alone on the front porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. "Thank you for the bookkeeping help," Nate said. "Patterson says I should get most of that money back once the court sorts it all out." "I'm glad I could help." "It's more than help. You saw a problem and fixed it, not because I asked, but because it needed doing." He turned to look at her fully. "That's rare. Most people only do what's expected, nothing more. My mother taught me to see what needs doing and do it. Waiting for permission is how women end up powerless. Your mother sounds like she was formidable. She was, and exhausted, and brilliant. She worked herself to death trying to prove she was worth something. Maggie's throat tightened. I miss her every day. Nate's hand found hers in the darkness. Elena's been gone 5 years. Some days it feels like yesterday. Other days it feels like another lifetime. His fingers laced through hers. The grief doesn't go away, but it changes, becomes something you carry instead of something that carries you. They sat in silence, hands joined, watching the stars emerge one by one. The following week brought unexpected trouble. Maggie was working in the cabin when she heard shouting outside. Through the window, she saw 3 men on horseback, rough-looking men with hard eyes and guns on their hips. She recognized the leader, Dutch Prescott Harold's older brother, the one who ran the family's less legitimate businesses. Maggie stepped onto the porch, keeping her expression neutral. Can I help you, gentlemen? You the seamstress? Dutch Prescott didn't dismount. Living on Sterling's property. I am. We're here about a debt. Benjamin Hartwell owes our family $500. Since Hartwell's accounts are frozen, we're collecting from his associates. I'm not Benjamin Hartwell's associate. I was his intended bride. He refused me. Semantics. Dutch's smile didn't reach his eyes. You cost Hartwell his business with your meddling in his books. That makes you responsible for his debts. Fear spiked through her, but Maggie kept her voice level. The law doesn't work that way. The law's in town. We're out here. Different rules. He leaned forward in his saddle. You've got 3 days to come up with $500, or we start taking payment in other ways. They rode off before she could respond, leaving dust and threat hanging in the air. Maggie's hands shook as she went back inside. $500. She didn't have 50, and even if she did, paying extortion would only invite more demands. She was still trying to calm her racing heart when Nate arrived an hour later. He took one look at her face and went still. What happened? She told him everything. The Prescott gang, the debt, the threat. His expression went from concerned to furious to coldly calculating in the space of seconds. They came here to my property, threatened you. They'll be back in 3 days. No, they won't. He was already moving toward the door. I'll handle this. Nate, wait. Maggie caught his arm. These aren't businessmen. They're criminals. You can't just confront them. Watch me. No. She moved in front of him, blocking his path. Violence will only make this worse. We need to be smart about this. Smart how? The answer came to her, suddenly fully formed. The ranchers Benjamin defrauded. They're all struggling with cash flow because of what he stole. What if we created a purchasing cooperative pool, our money, to buy supplies directly from Denver, cut out the middleman, save everyone money, and starve out the Prescott's protection racket at the same time? Nate stared at her. That's brilliant, and it solves multiple problems at once. It also requires cooperation, trust, getting people to work together instead of as individuals. You can do that. People respect you after what you uncovered about Benjamin. They barely know me. Then they'll get to know you. He cupped her face in his calloused hands. Maggie, you're the smartest person I've ever met. If anyone can organize this, it's you. The touch was intimate, tender. His thumb traced her cheekbone, and she found herself leaning into his palm. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I, but we'll figure it out together. His eyes searched hers. Together, Maggie. Not you alone, not me alone. Together. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. That night they made plans. Nate would contact the other ranchers, arrange a meeting. Maggie would work out the numbers, calculate potential savings, create a proposal that made financial sense. 3 days later, 8 ranchers gathered in Nate's barn. Hard men weathered by years of frontier life, skeptical of change. Maggie stood before them with her ledgers and calculations, her silver hair gleaming in the lamplight. Gentlemen, I'm going to show you how to save your ranches, she began. For the next hour she walked them through the cooperative model, bulk purchasing power, direct relationships with Denver suppliers, elimination of Hartwell's markup, and the Prescott's protection fees. She had numbers, projections, specific examples of how much each ranch could save. Tom Bradley, the oldest rancher present, spoke first. This would work, but it requires trust. We'd all be putting money into a central fund. I'll manage the fund, Maggie said. Keep detailed books, monthly reports, complete transparency. Why should we trust you? You're not from here. No, but I found the theft that cost you all money. I have no stake in cheating you. And unlike Benjamin Hartwell, my reputation is built on honesty, not deception. The men exchanged glances. Then Sam Briggs, a younger rancher, nodded. I'm in. What Hartwell did nearly bankrupted me. I'll take a chance on something better. One by one, they agreed. By the end of the meeting, all 8 ranchers had committed to the cooperative. As they filed out, Tom Bradley stopped beside Maggie. You've got steel in you, Miss Sullivan. This town needs more people like you. After everyone left, Nate pulled Maggie into the shadows of the barn. The autumn night was cool, but his body was warm as he wrapped his arms around her. You were magnificent, he said into her hair. Absolutely magnificent. She turned in his embrace, looking up at him. We did it together. No, you led. I just provided the venue. His hand came up to touch her face again, that gesture that was becoming familiar, necessary. Maggie, I need to tell you something. Her heart stuttered. What? When you stepped off that mail coach into the blizzard, I thought you were the unluckiest woman alive, but now I'm thinking maybe you're the luckiest, because that storm brought you here, to me. Nate, let me finish. His voice was rough. I loved Elena, loved her with everything I had. When she died, I thought that was it. One great love per lifetime, and mine was over. But these past weeks with you, I've realized something. The heart doesn't have a limit. It can love again differently, but just as deeply. Tears pricked Maggie's eyes. I'm not her. I know. You're you. Brilliant and brave, and so damn beautiful, it hurts to look at you. His thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped. Your silver hair, Maggie. It doesn't make you look old. It makes you look like you're crowned in moonlight. She laughed, a sound caught between joy and disbelief. That's the most poetic thing anyone's ever said to me. I'm not good with words, but I'm good with my hands. He released her, stepping back. Wait here. He disappeared into the forge, returning minutes later with something wrapped in cloth. I've been working on this for 2 weeks. Couldn't decide if I was being presumptuous or hopeful. But after tonight, after watching you command that room full of stubborn ranchers, I decided to stop hesitating. He unwrapped the cloth, revealing a rose. Not a real rose, but one forged from iron. Every petal was separate, delicately, curved, the entire bloom the size of her palm. The stem had careful thorns leaves that looked real enough to flutter in a breeze. It won't wilt, Nate said quietly. Won't fade. It'll last as long as the metal itself, longer than either of us. He met her eyes. I'm not good at this, at courting. But I know what I want, and I want you, Maggie Sullivan, not as my seamstress, not as my bookkeeper, as my partner, my equal, my love. Maggie took the iron rose with trembling hands. It was beautiful, more beautiful than any living flower because of what it represented. Hours of painstaking work, patience, skill. Love poured into every hammer strike. Yes, she breathed. Yes, what? Yes to all of it, to partnership, to being equals, to love. She looked up at him, this man who had saved her life and then given her a reason to live it fully. To you, Nate Sterling, always yes to you. He kissed her, then fierce and tender all at once. His hands buried in her silver hair, hers clutching the iron rose between them. The metal was cool against her skin, but his mouth was warm, and Maggie felt herself falling into the kiss like falling into safety. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nate rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said, not because it's expected, not for propriety, but because I love you, and I want to build a life with you. Yes. She kissed him again, softer this time. But Nate, the Prescotts, they won't just accept defeat. Starting the cooperative will make them our enemies. Let them come. We'll face them together. He pulled her close. You and me against the world, Maggie. I like those odds. She did too. For the first time in years, maybe in her whole life, Maggie Sullivan liked her odds at everything. The iron rose sat on Maggie's workroom table, catching firelight like captured starlight. She touched it often as she worked, reassuring herself that the previous night hadn't been a dream. Nate Sterling loved her, wanted to marry her, saw her silver hair as beautiful rather than shameful. The cooperative moved forward with surprising speed. Within a week, they'd pooled their first month's purchasing funds. Maggie kept meticulous records, every penny accounted for in neat columns. Tom Bradley's son rode to Denver with a list of supplies, returning 5 days later with wagons full of goods purchased at half the price Benjamin Hartwell had charged. Word spread. Other ranchers asked to join. Small business owners inquired about expanding the cooperative beyond ranch supplies. Even some of Pinewood's housewives approached Maggie asking if the cooperative could order fabric and household goods. "You're changing the whole economy of this region," Patterson the banker told her during a meeting to discuss the cooperative's account. "In 6 weeks, you've done what politicians and businessmen have failed to do in 6 years, created real, sustainable cooperation." "I just showed people the numbers," Maggie replied. "They did the rest themselves." "Don't be modest. Numbers without leadership are just ink on paper." Patterson pushed a document across his desk. "Which brings me to my proposal. The bank wants to hire you as a consultant. Review accounts, identify fraud help. Honest businesses organize their bookkeeping. Quarter-time work, generous compensation." More work, more income, more security than she'd ever imagined when she stepped off that mail coach into the blizzard. "I accept," she said. That Sunday, the Founders' Day Festival arrived. Pinewood transformed, overnight bunting strung between buildings, tables laden with food, a platform erected in the town square for dancing. The entire region turned out, ranchers and townspeople mingling with unusual ease. Maggie wore the dress she'd made from Nate's wool, deep burgundy that complemented her coloring. She left her silver hair uncovered, pinned up in an elegant style that Rose had helped her perfect. No hiding, not anymore. Nate met her at the cabin, arriving in a wagon rather than on horseback. He wore his best suit, black wool, that emphasized his broad shoulders. His silver hair was neatly trimmed, and when he saw Maggie, he went very still. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "You clean up well yourself." The ride to town was quiet but comfortable. Their hands found each other naturally, fingers lacing together on the wagon seat. When they arrived at the festival, heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. "Let them talk," Nate murmured, helping her down. "We know the truth." They walked through the festival together, not hiding their connection. Nate's hand stayed at the small of her back, a gentle claim. They stopped at booths, sampled food, chatted with ranchers who'd joined the cooperative. Mrs. Henderson appeared suddenly, blocking their path. The young widow wore a dress cut too low for the afternoon sun, her carefully arranged curls already wilting in the heat. "Mr. Sterling," she simpered, "how lovely to see you." "Mrs. Henderson?" Nate's tone was polite but cool. "And Miss Sullivan, my, what an interesting dress. Quite bold for someone of your advanced years." Her smile was poisoned sweet. "Though I suppose when one has so few opportunities for gaiety, one must seize them where one can." Maggie felt Nate tense beside her, but she placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Mrs. Henderson, I appreciate your concern for my social calendar, but I assure you my opportunities for happiness are quite abundant these days." "Are they? I've heard such concerning rumors, that you're living alone on Mr. Sterling's property, that you've inveigled yourself into his business affairs, that you're using your feminine wiles to trap a grieving widower." "Beatrice," Nate's voice cut like steel. "That's enough. I'm simply looking out for your best interests, Nathaniel. This woman is a fortune hunter, an aging spinster desperate enough to travel across the country chasing a marriage proposal. What makes you think her interest in you is genuine rather than mercenary?" Before Nate could respond, Rose appeared at Maggie's other side, her young face fierce. "What makes you think Uncle Nate needs protection from a good woman when he's been fending off predatory widows for 5 years? Rose's voice carried drawing attention from nearby festival goers. "Miss Sullivan has more integrity in her little finger than you have in your whole body. She's brilliant and kind and brave. And if Uncle Nate is lucky enough to win her affection, that makes him the fortunate one, not her." Mrs. Henderson's face flushed scarlet. "You impertinent child. Your uncle should teach you proper respect for your elders." "My uncle taught me to respect people who deserve it," Rose shot back. You've been chasing him like a starving dog after a bone. It's pathetic. Miss Sullivan never chased anyone. She's a prize worth earning, which is why Uncle Nate is courting her properly instead of accepting the desperate offerings of women like you." The crowd that had gathered murmured appreciatively. Mrs. Henderson looked around at the sea of unsympathetic faces and fled her too-tight dress, bouncing with each step. Maggie turned to Rose. "That was unnecessarily harsh." "No, it was necessarily honest." Rose linked her arm through Maggie's. "She's been awful to you since you arrived. Someone needed to tell her the truth. Your uncle should reprimand you for speaking to an adult that way." "My uncle is going to buy her an extra slice of cake for defending the woman he loves," Nate said, pride evident in his voice. They continued through the festival, but the encounter had drawn a line in the sand. People took sides. Some, like Mrs. Henderson, viewed Maggie with suspicion and resentment. But many more approached her with warmth, thanked her for the cooperative, complimented her dress, welcomed her to Pinewood. As evening fell, musicians took the platform. A fiddle, a guitar, an accordion. The dancing began, couples swirling under lantern light. Nate extended his hand. "May I?" Maggie placed her hand in his, let him lead her to the platform. They moved together naturally, his hand firm at her waist, hers resting on his shoulder. She'd never been a particularly good dancer, but with Nate it didn't matter. He guided her smoothly through the steps, his blue eyes never leaving her face. "People are staring," she murmured. "Let them." He pulled her slightly closer. "I'm dancing with the most remarkable woman in Colorado. They should stare." "Nate? I mean it. Look what you've built in 6 weeks. A business, respect, an entire economic system that's going to transform this region. You did that, Maggie, not me, not the ranchers. You. We did it together. You led. I just followed." The music shifted to a slower song, and he drew her closer still, improper but perfect. "I need to ask you something." Her heart skipped. "What? Will you marry me, Maggie Sullivan, publicly, properly, so everyone knows you're mine and I'm yours?" She looked into his blue eyes, this man who had saved her life and then given her reasons to live it fully. "Yes," she breathed, "always yes." Before she could say more, the song ended. Nate released her, stepping to the edge of the platform. He raised his hand, and the crowd quieted. "Friends, neighbors," he called, his deep voice carrying easily. "I have an announcement. Miss Margaret Sullivan has done me the very great honor of agreeing to become my wife. We'll marry before winter, and I hope you'll all celebrate with us." Silence. For one terrible moment, Maggie thought the crowd would reject them. Then applause began, scattered at first, then building. Tom Bradley whooped. Rose squealed and rushed the platform to hug Maggie. The cooperative members cheered. Not everyone applauded. Mrs. Henderson stood stone-faced near the refreshment table. Harold Prescott, attending despite his brother's threats, watched with calculating eyes. A handful of others looked disapproving or shocked, but most people smiled, clapped, wished them well. "Speech," someone called. Maggie's throat tightened. She'd never been good at public speaking, had always preferred to work quietly behind the scenes, but Nate's hand found hers, squeezed gently, and she found her voice. "Thank you," she said. "Pinewood wasn't where I planned to build my life, but plans change, sometimes for the better." She looked at Nate. "I came here as a rejected mail-order bride with 17 cents and a trunk of belongings. I was ready to give up. But this town, this man showed me that endings can be beginnings. That being different isn't a curse, it's a gift. That silver hair can be a crown instead of a burden." Her free hand went to her unpinned hair, the gesture deliberate. "I'm not hiding anymore. Not from gossip, not from judgment, not from life. And I hope my example gives someone else the courage to stop hiding too." The applause this time was thunderous. Act 2, D. External threat escalates 80 to 95 minutes. The euphoria of the engagement lasted exactly 3 days. Maggie was working in her cabin when she heard hoofbeats, multiple horses approaching fast. She looked out the window to see Dutch Prescott and 5 men, all armed, surrounding her porch. Her hands went cold. She'd known this was coming, had prepared mentally, but theory was different from reality. 6 armed men versus 1 woman alone. The math was not in her favor. She opened the door before they could knock, keeping her expression neutral. "Mr. Prescott?" "Miss Sullivan." Dutch smiled, and it was worse than his anger would have been. "Heard about your engagement. Congratulations. Sterling's a lucky man." "Thank you. Also heard about your little cooperative. Very enterprising. Very bad for business. Your business, perhaps, but excellent for honest commerce. Here's the thing about honest commerce. It doesn't account for protection fees, insurance against accidents." He leaned against the porch railing, casual and threatening all at once. "Wagons can catch fire. Warehouses can collapse. People can get hurt. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining reality. You've interfered with established systems. That has consequences." His smile widened. "My brother Harold made you an offer. You refused. That was your first mistake. Starting this cooperative was your second. And getting engaged to Sterling, that was just insulting. Like you're rubbing our faces in your success. I'm sorry you see my happiness as an insult to you. Don't be coy. You know exactly what you're doing. Turning the town against us. Destroying our income streams. Making us look weak." He straightened. "So here's the new deal. The cooperative dissolves by the end of the week. You leave Pinewood, and we forget this whole unpleasant situation. And if I refuse, then we stop being polite." He gestured to his men. "We're reasonable people, Miss Sullivan. We don't want violence, but we will protect our interests by any means necessary." Before she could respond, more hoofbeats sounded. Nate appeared around the bend, riding hard rifle visible in his saddle holster. Behind him rode Tom Bradley and 4 other cooperative ranchers, all armed. Dutch's expression darkened. "Well, looks like the cavalry's arrived." Nate dismounted smoothly, positioning himself between Maggie and the Prescott gang. "You're on my property, Dutch. Uninvited and unwelcome. I'll give you 10 seconds to leave before I forget my manners. Your property, your woman, your cooperative." Dutch's tone was mocking. "You've been busy, Sterling, building an empire on the backs of honest businessmen. Honest businessmen don't extort protection fees, they don't threaten women, and they don't show up with armed thugs to intimidate people into compliance." Nate's hand rested on his rifle. "Now leave, while you still can." For a long moment the two groups faced off. 6 Prescott men against 6 cooperative ranchers. The tension was thick enough to cut. Then Dutch laughed. "This isn't over, Sterling. Not by a long shot. You think your little cooperative is safe? Think again. We know where those supply wagons travel. We know where they're stored. We know which ranches are most vulnerable." He wheeled his horse around his men following, but before riding off he looked back at Maggie. "Enjoy your engagement, Miss Sullivan. Weddings are such happy occasions. Be a shame if something ruined yours." After they left, Nate pulled Maggie into his arms. She was shaking adrenaline, making her limbs weak. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. "Did they touch you?" "No, just threats. But Nate, they meant it. They're going to come after the cooperative. After us." Tom Bradley approached, his weathered face grim. "Dutch Prescott doesn't make idle threats. We need to be ready for retaliation." "Agreed." Nate released Maggie reluctantly. "Tom, can you organize a watch schedule? Make sure the supply wagons are guarded, the warehouse is secure." "Already on it. But Sterling, that's defensive. We need to be proactive." "What are you suggesting?" "Contact the territorial marshal, file formal complaints, get the law involved before this turns into a range war." Nate nodded slowly. "I'll ride to the capital tomorrow, but in the meantime, we protect our people." The men dispersed to organize defenses, leaving Maggie and Nate alone on the porch. The autumn sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, beautiful and incongruous with the fear churning in her stomach. "This is my fault," she said quietly. "The cooperative was my idea. If I hadn't pushed it, then we'd all still be getting robbed by Benjamin Hartwell and paying protection to the Prescotts." Nate turned her to face him. "Maggie, you did nothing wrong. You created something good. The fact that criminals are angry about losing their income stream isn't on you." "But Rose, the ranch, you could lose everything because of me." "No, I could lose everything if I let fear dictate my choices. If I let bullies win." His hands cupped her face. "You showed me it's possible to fight corruption with intelligence instead of just violence. To build instead of just defend. I'm not giving that up. I'm not giving you up." That night, Maggie couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to the night sounds, jumping at every creak of wood, every gust of wind. Her mind kept returning to Dutch Prescott's threat. Be a shame if something ruined yours. The wedding. He was going to target the wedding. She rose before dawn, dressing quickly. She needed to think, to plan. Violence wasn't the answer, but neither was passive defense. There had to be a solution that didn't end in bloodshed. The answer came to her as she was making coffee. Not a solution exactly, but the beginning of one. If the Prescotts wanted money, if that was their true motivation, then maybe they could be bought off. Not with cash directly, but with something more valuable. An hour later, she rode to town, arriving at Patterson's bank as it opened. "Miss Sullivan?" The banker looked surprised. "What brings you here so early?" "I need information about the Prescott businesses, what they own, what they owe, what vulnerabilities they have." Patterson's eyebrows rose. "That's confidential information. I'm not asking you to violate your ethics. I'm asking you to help me find a legal way to neutralize a threat to the cooperative." She leaned forward. "Dutch Prescott threatened me yesterday, threatened the cooperative, threatened my wedding. I want to stop him without violence, but I need leverage, and leverage comes from knowledge." The banker studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled out a ledger. "The Prescott lumber mill is mortgaged to the hilt," he said quietly. "Harold's store is barely breaking even without the fraudulent income. They're cash poor, but asset rich. If their income streams dry up, they'll default on loans within 3 months. What happens then? The bank forecloses, auctions the properties, uses the proceeds to cover the debt." Maggie's mind raced. What if someone bought those debts from the bank, became the new note holder? That's possible, unusual but legal. Patterson's eyes sharpened. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking the cooperative could pool resources, buy the Prescott debts, then offer them a choice. Leave Pinewood, and we forgive the debts. Stay and cause trouble, and we foreclose immediately. That's brilliant and perfectly legal." Patterson pulled out more ledgers. "Let me run the numbers." An hour later, they had a plan. The cooperative members, pooling their resources, could afford to buy the Prescott debts. It would stretch their finances, but it was doable, and it would give them leverage without requiring violence. Maggie called an emergency cooperative meeting that afternoon. In Nate's barn, she laid out her proposal to the assembled ranchers. "We can't beat the Prescotts with guns," she said. "They have more men, more experience with violence, but we can beat them with money and law." She explained the debt purchase plan. The men listened skeptical at first, then intrigued. "It's risky," Tom Bradley said. "If they don't take the deal, we've spent our reserves for nothing." "They'll take it," Maggie replied, "because the alternative is losing everything. Dutch Prescott is mean and greedy, but he's not stupid. When faced with exile with forgiven debts versus staying and losing everything, he'll choose exile." Sam Briggs nodded slowly. "I'm in. Better to risk money than blood." One by one, the others agreed. By sunset, they'd committed the funds. Patterson would handle the debt purchase through proper legal channels. It would take a week to finalize, a week during which they'd be vulnerable to Prescott retaliation. Act 3, a major crisis, 95 to 110 minutes. The retaliation came on the 5th day, but not in the way anyone expected. Maggie woke to pounding on her cabin door, Rose's voice high and panicked. Miss Sullivan, please." She threw open the door to find Rose, pale and shaking still in her nightgown with a coat thrown over it. "It's my fault," Rose gasped. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't think—" Rose calmed down. "What happened?" "I was riding back from town yesterday. Took the shortcut through the East Ravine. My horse stumbled through me. I hit my head." She touched a purple bruise on her temple. "Tom Bradley found me, brought me home. But I must have hit harder than I thought, because I woke up an hour ago and something's wrong. My stomach, pain, and bleeding." Maggie's medical knowledge was limited, but she knew enough to recognize danger. "Where's your uncle?" "Rode to the Capitol 2 days ago for the marshal. Won't be back until tomorrow." Rose's eyes filled with tears. "Mrs. Harper from the ranch came to help, but she says I need a real doctor. And Miss Sullivan, I'm scared, because I think I might be—" She didn't finish, didn't need to. Maggie saw the truth in her eyes, in the way she cradled her stomach. Pregnant. Rose was pregnant. "How far along?" 3 months, maybe. I didn't know for sure. Was planning to tell Uncle Nate after the engagement celebration, but now her voice broke. Am I losing the baby? I don't know, honey, but we're going to get you help. Maggie was already moving, throwing on clothes, grabbing her medical supplies, the basics she'd learned from her mother, supplemented by a medical manual she'd studied. Can you ride? I don't think so, the pain. Then we'll take the wagon. Mrs. Harper can drive while I tend to you. They made the journey to town as quickly as they dared, Rose lying in the wagon bed with Maggie beside her. The bleeding was getting worse. The pain was making Rose cry out with each jolt of the wheels. Tell me about the father, Maggie said, trying to distract her. Does he know? David Chen. His family runs the laundry in town. Rose's voice was thin with pain. We were going to announce our engagement at the harvest dance next month, but his parents don't approve, say I'm too young. And now Uncle Nate will be furious. I've brought shame on the family. Nate will be concerned for you. That's all that matters right now. They reached Pinewood as the sun was rising. Doc Harris, the town's only physician, was a man in his 60s, with kind eyes and steady hands. He examined Rose in his office while Maggie waited in the outer room pacing. An hour later he emerged. The baby's alive, for now, but Miss Sterling has a placental abruption. The fall caused partial separation. She needs complete bed rest for weeks, possibly months. Any exertion could cause full separation, and she'd hemorrhage. Both she and the baby could die. Maggie's legs went weak. What can we do? Keep her still, keep her calm, and pray. He paused. I've given her something for the pain. She's sleeping now, but Miss Sullivan, she's asking for you. Wants you to be the one to tell her uncle. Rose was pale against the white sheets, looking impossibly young. Her eyes fluttered open when Maggie entered. The baby, fighting, just like its mother. Maggie took her hand. You need to rest, Rose. No stress, no movement. Uncle Nate, when he finds out about David, will be grateful you're alive. The rest we'll handle together. Maggie squeezed her hand gently. Right now, you focus on staying still and letting your body heal. As Rose drifted back to sleep, Maggie stepped into the hallway. Mrs. Harper was there, her weathered face creased with worry. I sent word to the ranch, the older woman said. One of the hands will intercept Mr. Sterling on his way back. Tell him to come straight to town. Good. Thank you. Maggie rubbed her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her. She'd been awake for nearly 24 hours. I'll stay with her. Make sure she doesn't try to get up. You should rest too, Miss Sullivan. You look ready to collapse. I'm fine. She wasn't fine. She was terrified. Rose had become like a daughter to her, the family she'd lost when her parents died. The thought of losing her or the baby was unbearable. She returned to Rose's room, settling into the chair beside the bed. Through the window she could see Pinewood going about its morning business. People who had no idea that in this small room 2 lives hung in the balance. Nate arrived 6 hours later. Maggie heard his boots on the stairs, heard his voice demanding to see his niece. She met him at the door, placing a hand on his chest. She's sleeping. The baby's alive. But Nate, there's something you need to know first. She told him everything. The pregnancy, David Chen, the accident, the abruption, watched his face cycle through shock, anger, fear, and finally settle on grim determination. Can I see her? Of course, but don't wake her. She needs rest more than anything. He entered the room like he was approaching a spooked horse, careful and quiet. Sat in the chair Maggie vacated, took Rose's hand in his much larger one. I'm here, Rose girl, he whispered. I'm here, and I'm not leaving. Maggie left them alone, stepping into the hallway. Her body was demanding sleep, food, basic care, but her mind wouldn't quiet. Rose would survive. The doctor was confident of that, barring complications. But weeks of bed rest meant vulnerability. The ranch needed Rose's help with accounts, with household management. And with Nate focused on his niece, who would watch for Prescott retaliation. The answer came to her tired brain slowly. She would. She'd have to. She was heading down the stairs when she nearly collided with a young Chinese man, mid-20s, well-dressed, his face etched with fear. David Chen, he said. I heard Rose was hurt. Is the baby? Both alive. But Rose needs complete rest. The pregnancy is complicated. Relief and guilt warred on his face. This is my fault. I should have told my parents sooner. Should have insisted we marry immediately instead of waiting. If I'd been taking care of her, she wouldn't have been riding alone." "What happened is no one's fault," Maggie interrupted. "Accidents happen. Blaming yourself helps no one." "Can I see her?" "Her uncle's with her now. But David, you should know that Nate Sterling is protective of Rose. Very protective. If you care about her, you need to be prepared to fight for her." "I love her." His voice was steady, despite the fear in his eyes. "I want to marry her, want to raise our child together. My parents' disapproval be damned." "Then you'll need to tell Nate that, soon, before he decides for himself what's best for Rose." Maggie left David in the hallway and made her way to Patterson's bank. Even exhausted, even worried about Rose, she couldn't let the cooperative's defense fall apart. Patterson looked up from his desk as she entered. "Miss Sullivan? I heard about Miss Sterling. How is she?" "Stable, but she'll be in bed for weeks." Maggie sank into the chair across from him. "Which means the cooperative loses one of its strongest advocates right when we're most vulnerable." "The debt purchase is finalized," Patterson said. "We now hold the notes on the Prescott Mill and Hartwell store. Total amount owed $600. And the supply wagons, the ones coming from Denver, arrived safely yesterday. Guarded round the clock until they could be unloaded and distributed." He paused. "There's been no Prescott activity, no threats, no harassment, nothing." That worried Maggie more than violence would have. Dutch Prescott wasn't the type to simply give up, which meant he was planning something bigger. She was proved right the next evening. Maggie was sitting with Rose reading aloud from a novel when shouting erupted in the street below. She went to the window to see a crowd gathering, and in the center of it, Dutch Prescott on horseback holding a torch. Her blood went cold. "Stay here," she told Rose. "Don't move, don't get up, don't even think about leaving that bed." She raced downstairs and into the street. Tom Bradley was already there, along with half a dozen other cooperative members. They formed a barrier between Prescott and the doctor's office. "What's this about, Dutch?" Tom demanded. "This is about justice," Prescott's voice carried over the crowd. "You people think you can destroy our livelihoods, steal our businesses. There are consequences. We haven't stolen anything. We bought your debts legally through the bank. Legal theft is still theft." Prescott gestured to his men, all holding torches. "We're giving you a choice. Forgive those debts, dissolve the cooperative, and we leave peacefully. Refuse, and we burn down everything you've built." Maggie pushed through the crowd, stepping into the open space between the two groups. "Mr. Prescott, burning buildings won't change the fact that you owe money you can't repay." "Well, if it isn't the mastermind herself." His smile was cruel. "How's Sterling's niece heard she had a nasty fall? Be a shame if something happened to her while she's recovering. Accidents are so common these days." Rage flooded Maggie, hot and sharp. But beneath it, cold calculation. He was threatening Rose, threatening violence against a pregnant girl. That would turn even his allies against him. "You just threatened bodily harm to an expectant mother in front of 50 witnesses," she said calmly. "That's a criminal offense. And while territorial law may be slow, it's not deaf. Your word against mine. Our words against yours." Tom Bradley stepped forward. "I heard the threat. So did everyone here. You've crossed a line, Prescott." The crowd murmured agreement. Even some of Prescott's own men looked uncomfortable. Maggie pressed her advantage. "Here's what's going to happen. You and your brother are going to leave Pinewood tonight. We'll forgive your debts in exchange for signed statements that you're relinquishing all property claims and leaving Colorado permanently." "Or what?" "Or we foreclose tomorrow. The bank auctions your properties. You get nothing. And I personally ensure that every territorial marshal between here and California knows what you've threatened. You'll never be able to set up shop anywhere in the West." Dutch's face reddened. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Maggie pulled a document from her pocket. She'd prepared it that afternoon just in case. "This is a debt forgiveness agreement. Sign it, leave town, and you walk away with your lives and freedom intact. Refuse, and you lose everything." "I'll burn this town to the ground first." "No, you won't." Nate's voice cut through the tension. He emerged from the doctor's office, rifle in hand, but pointed at the ground. "Because if you so much as singe a fence post, I will hunt you down myself. And Dutch, you know I'm not a man who makes idle threats." The two men stared at each other. Years of frontier survival, of understanding violence and power, passed between them. And finally Dutch blinked. "Fine." He dismounted, snatching the document from Maggie's hand. "But mark my words, Sterling, this doesn't end here. Someday, somehow, you'll pay for this." "I'll be waiting." Dutch signed with angry slashes of the pen. His brother Harold, summoned from his store, signed with shaking hands. Within an hour they'd loaded their personal belongings onto wagons and rode out of Pinewood, heading east. The crowd erupted in cheers. Tom Bradley clapped Maggie on the back so hard she stumbled. Nate caught her, pulling her close. "You did it," he said into her hair. "You actually did it. Defeated them without a single shot fired. We did it. Together." She looked up at him. "How's Rose?" Furious that she missed the excitement, but stable. "Doc says if she stays in bed like she's supposed to, she and the baby should be fine." He paused. "David Chen's with her now. They're talking, planning. I gave them my blessing." "You did." "He loves her. Wants to marry her. Wants to raise their child." Nate's smile was wry. "I'm not thrilled about becoming a great uncle at 45. But I'm not going to stand between Rose and her happiness. I've learned something from you about letting go of how things should be and embracing how they are." Maggie kissed him then in front of the entire town, a claiming as public as his had been. When they broke apart, her voice was steady. "Let's go home. All of us. Let's build the life we've fought for." 3 weeks later, on a clear autumn morning, Rose went into early labor. The pregnancy had been fragile since the accident, and despite weeks of careful bed rest, her body decided it was time. Maggie rushed to the doctor's office at dawn, arriving to find Rose pale and frightened, David holding her hand with white knuckles. "It's too early," Rose gasped between contractions. "The baby's not due for another 6 weeks." Dr. Harris met Maggie's eyes grimly. "The placenta is separating completely. If we don't deliver now, we'll lose them both." For the next 15 minutes, Maggie worked alongside the doctor. Her hands, trained in delicate embroidery, proved steady for the brutal work of emergency childbirth. She held Rose's hand, coached. Her breathing wiped the sweat from her forehead with a cool cloth. The contractions came faster, harder. Rose screamed a sound of such primal agony that David tried to leave, unable to bear it. Maggie grabbed his arm. "She needs you here. Stay." He stayed. When the baby finally emerged, tiny and gray and terrifyingly silent, Maggie was the one who cleared its airway with quick, practiced movements learned from the medical manual she'd studied. She rubbed the tiny chest, willing life into the fragile body. 1 second. 2. 3. Then the baby's first cry, thin but strong, filled the room. "A girl," Dr. Harris announced, his relief evident in every syllable. "Small but healthy lungs on her." Rose reached for her daughter with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face. "Elena," she whispered. "After Aunt Elena." David bent over them both, his face transformed by wonder and terror and love. "She's perfect. You're perfect." Maggie stepped back, her dress stained with blood, her body shaking with exhaustion and relief. Through the window she could see Nate pacing in the street below, having arrived mid-labor. She went to tell him. "It's a girl," she said from the doorway. "Mother and baby both survived. Elena Rose Chen." The tension drained from Nate's face. He pulled Maggie into his arms, not caring about the blood on her dress or the eyes watching from windows. "You saved them," he said roughly. "Both of them." "The doctor saved them. I just helped." "You did more than help. You were the steady hand when everyone else was panicking." He pulled back to look at her. "Maggie Sullivan, is there anything you can't do?" "Apparently not deliver babies," she said with a shaky laugh, "though I'd prefer not to make it a habit." Act 3. B. Resolution. 110 to 115 minutes. The wedding took place on the first Saturday in October. 8 weeks after the Prescott brothers left town, 5 weeks after baby Elena was born, 3 weeks after Rose was declared strong enough to attend with her newborn daughter. Maggie wore a dress she'd made herself, silvery blue silk that shimmered like water. Her hair, completely silver now, without a single dark strand remaining, was woven with autumn leaves and tiny flowers. No veil, no hiding. The ceremony was held on a ridge overlooking Silver Ridge Ranch. The entire valley spread below them, painted in golds and oranges and reds. Half of Pinewood attended, along with ranchers from 3 counties. Even Patterson the banker came bringing his wife and children. Reverend Miller, the same minister who'd married Rose and David 3 weeks earlier in a quiet bedside ceremony, performed the service. His words were simple but powerful. Marriage is not ownership, it's partnership. 2 people choosing every day to walk the same path, to build the same dream, to face the same storms. When it came time for vows, Nate took both Maggie's hands in his. "Margaret Sullivan, you came into my life in a blizzard, cold and desperate and ready to die. But you didn't die. You fought. You survived. You thrived." His voice roughened. "You showed me that life doesn't end with grief, that love isn't finite, that second chances are real if we're brave enough to take them. I vow to be your partner, your equal, your shelter in storms, for as long as I draw breath." Maggie's turn. She looked into his blue eyes, this man who'd saved her and then let her save herself. "Nathaniel Sterling, I came here expecting rejection. What I found was acceptance, not despite my differences, but because of them. You saw my silver hair not as aging, but as distinction. You saw my intelligence not as threat, but as asset. You saw me." Her voice caught. "I vow to be your partner, your equal, your forge where rough metal becomes something beautiful, for as long as I draw breath." They exchanged rings, simple iron bands that Nate had forged himself, etched with tiny roses. When Reverend Miller pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up could probably be heard in Denver. The reception was held in Nate's barn, transformed with lanterns and autumn decorations. Tables laden with food contributed by every family in the cooperative. Music from a local band, fiddles and guitars, and someone's accordion. Maggie and Nate opened the dancing. She'd worried she'd be too nervous, but in his arms everything felt easy. Natural. Right. Halfway through the evening, Tom Bradley called for attention. The crowd quieted. "I'm not much for speeches," he began, "but I want to say something about these 2 people. 2 months ago we were all being robbed blind and didn't even know it. We were afraid of the Prescotts, resigned to the way things were. Then this woman showed up and said, 'What if things could be different?'" He raised his glass. "She didn't just talk about change, she created it, with intelligence and courage and a refusal to accept that wrong is inevitable. And she found a partner in Nate Sterling who had the wisdom to recognize her brilliance and the strength to support it. To the Sterlings, may their marriage be as strong as their partnership." The toast was echoed by everyone present. Even Mrs. Henderson, in attendance with her new beau, raised her glass grudgingly. Late in the evening, Maggie found herself on the porch with Rose. The girl held baby Elena, the infant sleeping peacefully despite the noise from the barn. "Thank you," Rose said softly. "For what? For seeing me as capable instead of just young. For supporting my choices even when they were hard. For showing me what a strong woman looks like." She touched Elena's soft cheek. "I want to be like you, Mrs. Sterling, strong and smart and unafraid." "You already are, Rose. You fought for your baby, for David, for your own happiness. That takes more courage than most people ever find." Maggie kissed the girl's forehead. "Elena is lucky to have you as a mother." David appeared, offering to take Rose and the baby inside where it was warmer. As they disappeared into the barn, Nate joined Maggie on the porch. "Happy Mrs. Sterling." Deliriously, she leaned into him. "Though I keep expecting something to go wrong, this much happiness feels dangerous." "That's just old habits talking. Fear that good things can't last." He turned her to face him. "But they can, Maggie. With work and choice and daily commitment, they can last forever." The party continued into the night. Tomorrow, Maggie would move her belongings from the cabin to the main house, would begin her new life not just as Nate's wife, but as a full partner in the ranch. The cooperative would continue growing stronger. Her consulting work with the bank would expand. Rose and David would raise Elena in the cabin building their own family. But tonight was for celebration, for dancing under lantern light with a man who loved her, for accepting congratulations from a community that had become home, for being seen, truly seen, as exactly who she was, silver hair and all. Epilogue. Legacy. 115 to 120 minutes. 1 year later, Maggie stood in the main house kitchen watching snow fall outside the window, the first snow of winter, gentle and beautiful rather than deadly. So much had changed in a year. The cooperative now served 11 counties, operated 2 warehouses, and employed 15 people full-time. Maggie's consulting practice had grown so large she'd hired an assistant training a young woman from town in bookkeeping basics. Baby Elena was walking now, a chubby toddler with David's dark hair and Rose's determination. Rose and David had expanded the cabin, adding a second bedroom in anticipation of another child. But the most significant change was the one Maggie carried within her own body. 4 months pregnant, showing just enough that her dresses needed letting out. At 37, she'd thought her childbearing years were behind her. The pregnancy had been a shock, then a terror, then finally a joy so profound it sometimes made her cry. Nate entered the kitchen, dusting snow from his coat. "Roads are getting bad. Tom Bradley says they might close the pass by next week. Then we'll be snowed in for winter. Good thing we stocked up." He moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, hands resting on her rounded belly. "How are you feeling? Fat, tired, happy? You're beautiful. You're biased." "Damn right I am." He kissed her neck. "My beautiful, brilliant, stubborn wife who changed everything." Maggie turned in his arms. "We changed everything. Together." "Together," he agreed. That word had become their touchstone. Together through the pregnancy scares. Together through the cooperative's growing pains. Together through the hard work of blending their lives into one shared existence. The front door opened, admitting Rose, David, and Elena. The young family had come for Sunday dinner, a tradition that continued despite the weather. As they gathered around the table, Maggie looked at the faces she loved. Nate at the head, silver hair glinting in the lamplight. Rose beside David, their hands linked on the table. Elena in her high chair, smearing mashed potatoes across her face with gleeful abandon. This was her family, found not born into, built through choice and effort and daily commitment. 5 years later, the Sterling house overflowed with children. Maggie and Nate's son Thomas, named for Tom Bradley, was 4. Their daughter Clara was 2. Rose and David had added twin boys to their family, and the cabin had been expanded again to accommodate the chaos. The cooperative had grown beyond anyone's dreams. It operated in 4 territories, now employed over 100 people, and had become a model that other regions studied and emulated. Maggie still consulted, though less frequently, focusing instead on training the next generation of bookkeepers and business managers. Silver Ridge Ranch had expanded too. 300 head of cattle, a breeding program for horses that was gaining national recognition, and a forge where Nate still worked, though he'd taken on 2 apprentices to handle the increased demand. But the true measure of their success wasn't in numbers or accolades. It was in the community they'd built. Pinewood had tripled in size, drawn by the cooperative's fair practices and economic opportunity. The town had a proper school now, a library, even a small theater. On their 10th anniversary, Nate gave Maggie a gift. Not jewelry or clothes, but a leather-bound journal. Inside, in his careful handwriting, was a record of every day since they'd met. Not detailed entries, just single lines. Blizzard, found her. Shawl commission, started falling. She saved the ranch, I'm hers. Wedding day, happiest day of my life. Thomas born, Maggie is the strongest person I've ever known. 10 years of single lines adding up to a life. You kept this, Maggie's voice was thick with tears. All this time, every day. So our children would know, so their children would know, how we started, how we built, how we loved. 25 years later, Maggie's hair was still completely silver, but now it was age instead of genetics. At 61, she moved a bit slower, tired, a bit faster. But her mind was sharp as ever, and her hands still produced beautiful embroidery when arthritis allowed. Nate was 70, his body weathered by decades of physical labor, but he still worked the forge when the mood struck, still rode the fence lines, checking cattle, still called her beautiful every morning. They sat on the porch of the main house watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Thomas's 3 children, Clara's 2, Rose, and David's 5. 10 grandchildren in total, ranging in age from 2 to 20. We built something good, didn't we? Maggie said softly. We built something that will last. Nate's hand found hers, fingers lacing together with practiced ease. Long after we're gone, this will still be here. The ranch, the cooperative, the family. The legacy. Our legacy. Nate Sterling died peacefully at 80 in his sleep with Maggie beside him. His heart simply stopped, worn out from a life fully lived. They buried him on the ridge where they'd married, overlooking the valley he'd loved. Maggie lived 7 more years surrounded by family. She died at 68 on a spring morning with all her children and grandchildren gathered. Her last words were to Thomas, "Tell your father I'm coming. Tell him I'm ready." They buried her beside Nate beneath a shared headstone. The inscription was simple. Nathaniel and Margaret Sterling, partners, equals, beloved. 50 years after Maggie's death, her great-great-granddaughter stood in the Sterling Family Museum, housed in what had been the original cabin. Display cases held artifacts from the family's history. The iron rose Nate had forged for their engagement, Maggie's first sewing scissors, ledgers showing the cooperative's founding documents, and in the center of the room under glass was the journal, Nate's daily record of their life together, hundreds of single-line entries spanning decades. Tourists came from across the country to see it, to read the story of a mail-order bride rejected for her silver hair who'd transformed an entire region's economy, of a widowed rancher who'd seen beauty where others saw flaw, of a partnership that had built not just a family, but a legacy. The Sterling Ranch still operated now in its 6th generation of family ownership. The cooperative had evolved into a regional corporation, but still operated on the principles Maggie had established. Fair prices, transparent accounting, community benefit over individual profit. And every year on the anniversary of Nate and Maggie's wedding, the current generation of Sterlings gathered on that ridge. They brought their children and told the story of a blizzard that brought 2 people together, of silver hair that became a crown instead of a shame, of love that built something lasting. The story always ended the same way, with the reminder that what Nate and Maggie had built wasn't just theirs. It belonged to everyone who came after, every person who chose partnership over possession, every person who saw differences as strength instead of weakness, every person who believed that endings could be beginnings if you were brave enough to start again. The legacy wasn't money or land or businesses. The legacy was possibility, and it lived on silver bright in every generation that followed. The end.